Most people I train tell me we've tried everything. But then when we look at it together, they haven't actually tried the principles of positive behavioral support or other models. They've tried punishment, but sometimes with a nicer label. Positive behavioral support isn't a poster on the wall. It's a systemic way of understanding behavior, reducing distress, and teaching something better instead. So let's go into a little bit of positive behaviour support. So PBS kind of spans from a principle called applied behavioural analysis, but with a much more person-centred approach and a much more neuro-inclusive kind of strategy to it. An understanding of behaviour is based on assessment and social and physical environment and of the function of behaviour, leading to more proactive and reactive strategies and teaching new skills. So basically the model is all about, similar to the principles that I teach, so we actually teach a slightly more integrative form of PBS, so it's PBS informed, but also trauma informed. We've also included some other elements in there from therapeutic processes and restorative practice. But PBS is one of the foundations that we've utilized within our system. And it really is that curiosity of behavior, recognizing all behavior as being a form of communication. And there must be a function to the behavior, or a trigger or a function. And by looking at an assessment of what's going on, so what we sometimes refer to as an ABC analysis, what led up to, what the behavior was, and what happened immediately after the behavior, we try to create an idea of exactly what the function of this behavior is. And then we create proactive strategies to kind of reduce the distress or help them to manage it. But it's all about teaching new skills as well. How can they meet that need themselves or cope with stress themselves? So in plain language, PBS is about why this behavior, why now, and what we can change in the world around the person and inside our own responses as well. So I use the PBS principles as kind of a format to develop my 6-stage target model that's in my book, Targeting the Positive with Behaviours That Challenge. My 6-stage target model is slightly unique, but it's based on PBS principles. We start off with identify. So this is where we're looking at actually what is a behavior. We're making sure that we're recognizing what behavior we're actually looking at and whether we actually need to change it. And ideas of what's changed over time. So, once upon a time, things like applied behavioral analysis used to be used to stop children with autism behaving autistically. But it was completely inappropriate. Why is it important if somebody engages in eye contact with us, if it's something that causes them distress? So it's a much more person-centered way of approaching. And what we're really looking for is a behavior maladaptive or hazardous? It's detrimental to their well-being, or is it just disliked? Then we go into, once we've identified the behavior we maybe they need support with, or this is something we need to review and understand. That's exactly what we go into, understanding and empathizing. Now, empathizing is something we've added in within our system a little bit more because sometimes it isn't easy to understand the function, so we have to understand the feelings. It's much more trauma-informed practice and restorative practice. But understanding is, what is the functionist behavior? What does it do for them? Does it allow them to escape? Does it gain them some attention? Does it give some sort of a sensory stimulus, control, comfort? So it's all about what are they gaining or what are they avoiding from this behavior? The proactive plan is then, what can we do to adjust the environment or change routines, or what skills they need to learn to be able to then do that themselves or to meet that need for them if that's the case? Now, part of that proactive planning is also going to be and what are we going to do if that behavior still occurs? Because one of the challenges we have, we sometimes accidentally reinforce a behavior without meaning to. So when we're looking at kind of our recognizing escalation and responding appropriately, we learn how to de-escalate in the moment. We learn how to not to reinforce that behavior in the moment in a way that, again, we're making sure we've got proactive as well as then in PBS, it's referred to as reactive. We've moved it over to responsive strategies. And then afterwards, then it's a learning process. So what do we need to tweak? What do we need to change? What's working? What isn't working? And it's actually based on figures. It's based on information. It's based on analysis, not just based on blind luck. So if we take for an example where we created a competing pathway for a particular gentleman that I worked with. So this gentleman, sometimes when engaging in activity, would become highly distressed and he would start hitting his own head. Now that hitting his own head had two functions. One was to gain sensory input and the other was to avoid the activity. Okay, so rather than trying to just stop the behavior and stop him from doing it or what, and enforce him to get the activities done, what we need to do is, okay, well, what strategies could he use that we'd consider to be more adaptive to allow him to gain some sensory input towards his head, but also to then escape the activity. But rather than forcing him to the activity, we need to give him a way of communicating that in maybe a more adaptive way. So over a period of time, we taught him how to communicate with, it didn't work great with Makaton. Picture cards seemed to work much better for him. So he would then the staff would notice the early signs, recognizing the escalation. They would then direct him towards his picture cards where he'd point at these head scratcher. And it was one of those claws that feels comfortable. He'd point at the picture of that, which indicated he wanted to stop the activity and he wanted to de-stress by using that sensory input. So then the staff would stop doing the activity. They'd then give him 2 minutes with his head scratcher. So now what they'd done is they'd given him a way of communicating his need. They'd given him a way of expressing himself, escaping the activity and gaining that sensory input, but in an adaptive rather than a maladaptive way. Now, obviously, our ideal scenario in this would be to get him to the point where he can continue to do an activity without needing to do that. He can complete it. But sometimes we need to start off by getting on the first step on the ladder rather than aiming to get the top of the ladder. That's a way of him meeting needs that's straight away we've managed the risk, we've reduced the distress, we've made him feel happier. He feels like he has more control and autonomy over his environment in a way that we know is safe. So this worked over a period of time, and then slowly over a period of time we worked towards that ultimate goal of being able to cope. There was no punishment, there was no frustration with him. And this is the nature of, this is why PBS was something I integrated into my Targeting the Positive book, as well as a kind of solution-focused therapy and things like that. It's all about, so what do we want rather than what we don't want? And this is one of the problems that so many of us, when we're dealing with behavior, we focus on what we don't want rather than what we do want. We want the person to be able to meet their needs. We want them to be able to feel safe and comfortable. I know most of us are working from a place of wanting the best for this person, but then we don't always utilize the focus on what they need and what they want. We're just trying to inhibit what we don't want. So that's the idea of the competing pathway. It's all about the behavior has a benefit. So we're trying to keep the benefit, but make it safer and a more adaptive way of gaining it. That's the fundamental philosophy of PBS. So if hitting gets me people to leave me alone and gives me space, then we need to give them a different way of them achieving that space, but still honor the need for space. It's still allowing them to have autonomy. It's still allowing them to have choice. It's still allowing them to have control and connection and everything that they need for their principles of well-being. For those of you who've watched the episode on the 6 C's of emotional well-being, you might be familiar with those. We're still about meeting those, but we're giving a replacement behavior. So positive behaviour support is not about being nice. It's actually a scientific and compassionate at the same time. It's based on principles of evaluating the environment, seeing what works and changing it to something that works better for the person. So if you only ask, how do I stop this behavior? You'll miss those much more important questions of what is this behavior actually achieving for them? What are they gaining from it? Now, we've built a little bit further into that, and we go into more depth in our able target system, where we also look at the emotional element of things, not just the functional element of things. But otherwise, the underlying principle is pretty much the same. So every behavioral plan should answer 2 things. How do we make this safer? And how do we make life better for the person and for the staff as well? Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of evidence that PBS is not as effective as we would hope it to be. But that's not because the principles aren't appropriate. It's because often the consistency of those in the environment don't apply it appropriately. We need to make sure that if some staff, let's say if we go back to the example with the gentleman with the head scratcher, if some staff are refusing to allow him to escape that activity and enforcing him to continue, or he gets to the point of the head banging, then straight away, all of the learning is not happening. It's like trying to help somebody to quit smoking, but keep giving them a cigarette. It's exactly the same principle. So consistency is really hard to gain, which is why a lot of PBS systems out there or a lot of courses that are taught don't really work, because doing a half day, 1 day course in PBS or whatever isn't enough. It needs to be ingrained within the culture. The mindset of the staff actually need changing towards this difference in approach. But this principle can work whether you work with various different environments, can work for all different settings. It doesn't matter whether it's somebody living with dementia. There's some complications and some differences. There's some principles we have to apply for those with PDA, things like that. But the fundamentals are still the same. There is always a benefit to every behavior. And if we can't see it yet, it means we haven't looked in the right place. Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behavior that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behavior can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later, wishing for an umbrella. What if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature, and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict, and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours That Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience, and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities, or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation, and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today.